welcome to my class, an introduction to the Hebrew calendar. My name is Berakha Bat Mira Vishlomo, and I'm here to tell you about a Jewish calendar, which is actually a calendar still in use today, but its origins are from right in the Bronze Age, and it goes on through multiple stages of development, all through the SCA period, and even a little bit beyond that. So it's very cool, and it's not unique to this particular subculture either. We're going to go through that evolution in, I guess, a quick time format over the next hour. Of course, this is an SCA event. We all agreed to the no bullying policy. We love that. Who am I? I am a Jewish person in mundane life, and I play a Jewish person in the SCA as well. A lot of the information I'm going to be telling you is something that I was first introduced to in yeshiva day school, but I paid attention in class is not an actual source that can be cited in anyone's research or ANS projects. So in terms of actual sources, the primary source is the Torah. You can read it yourself if you want. In English and Hebrew, pick up your local Bible. Good English Hebrew direct translations are found online at Sefaria and Machon Mamre, and you can have them side by side to do a comparative translation if you like. So I like those tools a lot. It is worth noting that the Torah is not a history book. I know a lot of people believe in it directly. I come from a community that believes in it directly. But when it comes to doing historical research, it's important to note that while this is an historical document, which means it has a lot of value for historical research, it's not a history book. It's not Josephus's Jewish Wars. It's not our history textbook. So kind of learning how to look at it not just as a religious document that you may hold very, very dear to you, but also as a text of its time is looking at it with a different set of eyes. And I just want to put that idea out there. When I say the Torah is a source, I don't mean that I'm looking at it as a history book, but I am looking at it as an historical document, which it is. Most scholars consider it a Bronze Age oral document that was then later codified and written down in the Iron Age. So that is more or less where it sits in time. The Talmud is another historical series of documents, really, that first started being written down 200 BC, and it continues being written through the year 500. My mom is a biblical scholar. She wrote a book called Conceiving a Nation, which touches a little bit on some of the material that will be going on over here. Primarily, that's a book about how the people of Israel kind of evolved from a sort of tribal federation under Egyptian auspices to a nation in its own right. So if you want to read that, that's Conceiving a Nation by Professor Morgenstern. My rabbi, when I needed help finding a specific thing, he would tell me, look in this particular section of the Talmud. So Rabbi Caleb Fisher deserves a shout out. And Wikipedia's source lists sometimes will have also interesting things. Obviously, like any good graduate student professor would tell you, Wikipedia is not a source. However, if Wikipedia cites its sources, sometimes those are useful. So if you're looking to delve more into this topic, that is how I did that. Please feel free to bug me for more about this after class. And of course, since we are talking about something that originates with the Jewish people, you get right into the question of who and what are Jews, which is very much a subject in its own right. The quick and dirty elevator version is that the Jewish people are a widespread diaspora ethno-religious group originating in the Levant, so a specific part of the Near East. Now, of course, there's lots of communities and customs, even different languages that have evolved due to millennia, plural, of diasporic influence and acculturation. And that is very much its own topic, but it is worth introducing just so that you know the origins of what we're about to talk about. Okay, that was that history lesson. On to the actual calendar. The Hebrew calendar is primarily a lunar calendar. Similar to the Muslim calendar, it's very much directed by the phases of the moon in a way that our secular calendar is not. However, unlike the Muslim calendar, our holidays go by the season, so it's really a combination of both a lunar and solar calendar. In order to make that work, there's a lot of funny math that has evolved to keep the lunar calendar more or less on track with the solar seasons. If you stick to only a lunar calendar, very quickly your holidays will become out of whack with the seasons on a 19-year cycle. A 12-month lunar year is only 354 days. A solar year is 365 and a quarter days. We are familiar with our standard leap year, which adds a day to the end of February. But in order to make the lunar year line up more or less with a solar year, you have a whole entire extra month. This is called an intercalary month, and it's inserted every couple of years, and it happens 7 times in a 19-year cycle. When I say funny math, this is what I'm talking about. This is known as the Metonic Cycle. And the Athenians did not invent it. It was around way before Meton of Athens was talking about this. Likely they learned it from the Babylonians. So this is something that is kind of going around the Near East throughout the Bronze Age, well into the Iron Age and the Classical period, because people in Athens were writing it down. The months of the year in the Hebrew calendar have some funny names, and it starts with the month of Nissan in spring. So these are fun names. We're just going to go through them very quickly. Nissan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av. Av is my birth month. It normally happens around August. Elul, which is the end of the year according to one count. Tishrei, Heshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, and Adar. These are very funny names for native English speakers to wrap their tongues around. However, they're not Hebrew names at all. These are primarily Babylonian and Akkadian names. The actual Hebrew names are just first month, second month, third month. They're not that interesting. But because of the Babylonian and Akkadian empires around the Near East, there was a lot of diasporic acculturation, and these names on the calendar have stuck around ever since. It's for thousands of years. A lot of Arab communities in the Fertile Crescent also use these names of the months, but not Arab communities in Egypt or North Africa. It's specific to the Fertile Crescent region. A friend of mine is from Lebanon, and we will literally refer to parts of the year with these names. We'll understand each other because this is just part of the community. It's been present in these calendars for literally thousands of years. So it's kind of cool to see how it's been preserved over time. These names are, like I said, a little bit odd. We're going to go through what they mean and where they originally came from. Tishrei is in the early autumn, and that is an Akkadian word. And it actually comes from a word that means beginnings, tashritu. And in the Hebrew calendar, Tishrei is the first month of not the ecclesiastical year, but the civil new year. We have multiple New Years, and they're not all on the same day. It's very confusing. But this is the beginning of the year in terms of when the calendar year changes over. So that is something that we learned from the Akkadians, and we've kept, even though the empire is long since gone. So if you're doing some Bronze Age persona stuff, this is pretty fun things. Heshvan actually comes from a longer word in Akkadian, Mar Heshvan, and that itself is a derivative of Wara Hasimnu, which is definitely a hard word to pronounce. And that just means the 8th month. How is it the 8th month? It's the 8th month if you count from Nissan. And that's from the ecclesiastical year, not the civil year. There is Hebrew folk etymology that was already around for hundreds of years that tries to ascribe a different origin to the word. Mar means bitter, and Heshvan being the name of the month, and that is described as sort of explain the lack of holidays and festivals in this month. It's a folk etymology. That means that it's not the actual origin of the word, but this folk etymology has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's actually something I learned in yeshiva, and my teacher was wrong. Kislev is also Akkadian. It comes from the month Kisilmu. This also has a lot of folk etymologies attached to it. In this case, it's because it's a winter month. It's misunderstood as being a word for rain, as in the rainy season in the Middle East is usually from the autumn through the winter. Tevet is also Akkadian. I have no idea what it means, but because it's a winter month, I'm assuming something with rain, something for further research, I suppose. Shvat is also a rain month. It's the very late winter into early spring, and that is referring to an Akkadian word for a heavy strike of rain. So a different type of rain, not a soft pitter-patter, but a very torrential thunderstorm sort of rain. So that's the season for that kind of winter rains. Adar is literally just an Akkadian word as well. It's not even derived from it or a mistranslation of it. And it's just a word whose translation I cannot find anywhere. I'm still looking. This is actually the end of the ecclesiastical year. So the intercalary month is inserted during this time. This happens at the very end of winter, early spring. and the intercalary month is added. So sometimes I will have a year with 2 months of Adar, and sometimes only 1. It's definitely a lot longer than February the 29th. Nissan is a spring month, and this is when the barley starts to ripen. This is actually a Sumerian word that the Akkadians borrowed, and Sumerian is not a Semitic language. It's not related to any of these other languages, but the Sumerian Empire, of course, long predates either the Akkadians or the Babylonians, so there's a lot of levels of acculturation happening here. It comes from the word nisag, which means first fruits. In the very beginnings of spring, this is when the fruits start to ripen. Iyar is later on in the spring, and that is a word for rosette or blossom, when all the trees are blooming and everything's wonderful and warm. Sivan is a time of later on in the spring turning into summer, and it just comes from the word simanu, which means a season. This is where you have a harvest festival, the festival of Shavuot, which means weeks. This is when, in the times of the temple, folks would bring the earliest of their harvest tithes to the temple, because in the summer is when they start to ripen. Tammuz is more or less happens in July, and that is named for the god Tammuz, also known as Dumuzi, and that is a vegetation god. If you're familiar with the myth surrounding Inanna, or that's a Sumerian goddess, or her Akkadian analog Ishtar, that is her consort, and he is killed and then revived. The hot, dry summer during this time of year is not associated with his life, it's associated with his death. The cult of Tammuz, of this vegetal god who is killed and revived, is actually something that survives in isolated parts of the Middle East well into the 11th century. So there's some surprising longevity with these indigenous polytheistic cults that last well into times of Christian and even Muslim establishment. Of seems in Semitic languages, of or ab means dad or father, and I can't find any alternative explanation to this month. So what I wrote here, it's a little bit silly, but what I wrote here is, I don't know why the Babylonians named a whole month for my dad, but they did. Elul actually means harvest, which is, again, not a Hebrew word, it's an Akkadian word. And this is later on in the autumn. It's the last month of the civil year, but it's just right smack in the middle of the ecclesiastical year. And of course, in the autumn is when you're bringing in the harvest. It is the last month before Rosh Hashanah, the Hebrew New Year. And in Jewish religion, this is a time for some very serious soul searching, time to set your New Year's resolutions and do better. But originally, it was really just an agricultural timekeeping. So going through all these funny names, you really start to see the sort of layers of civilization in the Middle East that ultimately inform this calendar that are still present to this day. So that's cool. How are we on time, by the way? Oh, we're doing pretty well.
6:20.
Okay, great. I might be talking a little fast. Please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. So in terms of looking at the Hebrew calendar, where I divided this into major holidays and minor holidays. There is something going on in every single month, with the exception of Cheshvan. So we're going to first look at the major holiday cycles. These are the ones that really sort of set the tone of the calendar. The biggest difference in terms of observance is that minor holidays will have some ritual attached, maybe an extra prayer. Back in the times when there were a temple, maybe there'd be some extra sacrifices, maybe there'll be some specific rituals, but in general, your day doesn't really change. It's still considered a work day. 2,000 years ago, you'd go to the farm. Today, I would still go to the office. Minor holidays don't mean I change that much. Major holidays, however, are a little more similar to the weekly Sabbath in that they're big productions. Your whole week is thrown out of whack. There's a lot of extra prayers. There would have been lots of different sacrifices, and you're not allowed to do work activities. That could be threshing the wheat, or in my case, that could be going to the office. That would be a no-no for the major holidays. They're very big deals. The biggest 3 holidays are not at all the New Year. They're part of the regalim. Regal means foot. These are pilgrimage holidays. So folks from all over the historic land of Israel would be literally going, whether by foot or by cart, to the temple to give sacrifices. Those would sometimes be animals, but sometimes it would be fruit or vegetable tithes, and they would go to the priestly clans and the Levites who had work there to do. So it was a whole big production. The New Year and the Day of Atonement, however, while they're very central and holy and part of the calendar, are not part of the pilgrimage cycles. Most of the fast days in the Hebrew calendar are considered minor holidays, with only one exception, that being the Day of Atonement. And generally speaking, there's something going on in every single lunar month. So the first holiday, we're going to start with Nissan, the spring month, and that is a minor holiday of Rosh Chodesh. The first of the month is considered a minor holiday. You will find this in Exodus in chapter 12. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. The Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim, Rishon hu lachem lachodesh hashana. This month is for you the head of all months, the first of all months. It is the first of it unto you, and it is the month of the year. I was just translating based off the Hebrew. It's slightly different from the English, but same. This is a big deal because it is the first holiday commanded to the Israelite people as a nation, as a national polity, and therefore it looms very large in the national imagination. However, it is still considered a minor holiday. This is actually just before the instructions in the same book about how to celebrate Passover. The Talmud in Masachet Megillah talks about this being a special holiday for women because lunar cycles, monthly cycles, do I need to say more? And historically, women were forbidden to engage in work. I'm very upset that this custom is no longer held by my people. I would love a monthly holiday, but alas, it's now mostly just a normal day, some extra prayers, and that's pretty much it. Now today, of course, we're not reliant on sticking our heads out the window and looking at the sky to see if there's a new moon. That's because we now have math. But even so, it is still announced in synagogue. The Sabbath before the new moon, the exact birth of the new moon, the molad, is announced. The day, the time, and what time of day it is. So it's still kind of a whole production. So historically, somebody would have to go outside, look at the sky, go to the Sanhedrin, which I guess you could call ancient Jewish Congress, and then the Sanhedrin would issue a proclamation, it's the new moon, with a community spread as far away in Babylon in Iraq. They would literally light signal fires on the tops of mountains, and then it would go all the way and travel that way to Babylon, and it would sometimes be a delay of a day or two. I have this gift from Lord of the Rings because when they lit the signal fires, and you can see them lighting up mountain after mountain, and it takes a day to reach, and then, Aragorn comes in and goes, the beacons are lit! My dumb ass said in the theater, why is it Rosh Chodesh? Anyway, it looked kind of like that. So I mentioned earlier that we have a couple of different New Years, and they're all at different times. So Happy New Year, thanks, which one? The Mishnah, which is first written down, it was oral law that was written down at about the year 200. The Gemara comments on it through the year about 500. Together, the Mishnah and the Gemara are the Talmud. You don't need to worry about this. But there are 4 New Years listed. The first of Nissan in the springtime is the ecclesiastical New Year for kings and festivals. That was why when I first listed the months, we started with the month of Nissan, and it corresponds to the first new moon holiday that as a nation was marked. This is also why the intercalary month happens in Adar. That's the final year of the cycle. By the end of the year, you know when you're in line with the sun or not, and you can kind of add an extra to make up for it. That is also why in the book of Exodus, the Torah describes Passover as falling in the first month. B'chodesh harishon, in the first month. Ba'aba'asar l'chodesh ben ha'arbayim, on the 14th day of the month in the afternoon. Pesach l'Adonai, it is Passover for the Lord your God. This is different from the first of Tishrei. That is Rosh Hashanah, the Hebrew New Year, and that always happens in the autumn. That's part of the days of awe. 10 days afterwards is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And that is when the date changes over. And that's the end of the agricultural cycle. So that's already 2 different New Years at totally different times of year. The first of Shabbat, which is in late winter, early spring, was considered a new year for trees. That's actually celebrated now on the 15th of Shabbat. I wrote here on the slide that this is an argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. These were different schools of thought, and they argued with each other. Most often, the arguments were settled in favor of Beit Hillel, but these arguments are all recorded in the Talmud. So if you want to read the oldest arguments the Jews have decided to write down, that's where you'll find them. So the 15th of Shabbat is celebrated as a minor festival for trees. It's also when historically tithes from your harvests would be calculated. You're looking at a very agricultural society. The first of Elul used to be the time to tithe cattle, but that was just kind of rolled into Tishrei over time. Like, why have 2 New Years 1 month apart? It got to be a little much. So that eventually sort of fell out of favor. Also, most of us aren't cattle herders anymore. Times change. The days of awe, I keep mentioning that is one of the holiest days of the year. So Rosh Hashanah, the first of the year, and the first of Tishrei in the autumn, is also called Yom Teruah. It is a day of shofar blasts. A shofar is a ram's horn. It goes toot toot. I don't have one to demonstrate, but you're probably better off that way. Originally, it was only 1 day, and it's recorded as such, but now it is 2 days, whether that's in Israel or the diaspora. You can find the source of this holiday in Leviticus. דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, בחודש השביעי באחד לחודש יהיה לכם שבתון זיכרון תורה מקרא קודש. Speak unto the people of Israel, saying, on the 7th month, see, first of the year, but it's the 7th month, on the first of the month, you will have a solemn rest. Shabbat relates to the word Sabbath, so it's a day of rest, but it's a solemn day of rest. It is a day of memorial and shofar blasts, and it will be a holy day. Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu, you shall not do any sort of work action. V'yikraftem isel Adonai, and you should bring a ewe or sheep offering to the Lord. So there you go, instructions for how to celebrate the day. A day of solemn rest, don't do work, bring a sacrifice to the temple, right there in the text. Yom Kippur is a fast day, and it is the holiest day of the year. It is a solemn day, but it's not a sad day. There are feasts associated with it, both before, to prepare for the fast, and after, when the fast is done. And it's also in Leviticus. It's mentioned in 2 different places. And, down here I have the Hebrew. "V'hayta lachem l'chukat olam b'chodesh hasvi'i v'asar lachodesh." So on the 10th of the 7th month, ta'anu et nafshosechem. You should fast for your souls. V'kol melecha lo ta'asu. You shall not do any work. V'ezrach v'hager hagar b'tocham. Whether that is the native or the immigrant or stranger amongst you. So that is for everybody in the area, whether you're a native son or not. Like, this is, everyone's in it together. Everyone's in it together on the holiest day of the year. Ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem letaher etchem. Because this day shall be an atonement for you, to purify you. Min kol chatotechem lifnei Adonai titaru. From all of your sins before the Lord, you shall be purified. Here it says you shall be clean, but close enough. Shabbat Shabbaton yelachem. It is a Sabbath of all Sabbaths. So you have that same word, Shabbaton, for both Rosh Hashanah as well as Yom Kippur. So it's you're coming with this idea of a solemn rest. V'inatem et nafshotechem chukat olam. It shall afflict your souls. And this is a statute forever. So afflict doesn't mean that you should necessarily suffer, but, fasting for 25 hours from sunset to sunset isn't anyone's idea of a good time. So there you go. That is the instructions, your marching orders right there in Leviticus. And we're still doing it. I'm not going to bother reading all of the Hebrew because I'm going to quickly need water, and I didn't prepare that. So here are just more verses from Leviticus about what you are and are not allowed to do on the holiest day of the year. This is actually a lot of instructions. It's pretty rare that you find this many instructions about the holiday in the Bible itself. A lot of this is really elucidated more in the Talmud. So that's when people were writing down the laws and the habits that the people were already doing. So this is something that does evolve over time from the Iron Age well through the classical period. I mentioned the pilgrimage cycles. So we've gone through the holiest days of the year, and they're kind of detached from most of the agricultural cycles. But the pilgrimage cycles are very much rooted in the agricultural rhythms of the ancient Near East. And they do involve bringing different types of harvest tithes to the temple and making sacrifices. There isn't a temple anymore. There hasn't been since the Romans burned it in the year 70, and that put a permanent stop to all these sorts of pilgrimages. So since the year 70, the adaptation has been to read the relevant verses in synagogue on the holiday. So the memory of what used to be a very centralized sort of calendar occurrence is preserved, but it's preserved in a very different manner. The holidays also have a dual purpose. So they mark a part in our agricultural cycle, but they also are meant to call to mind some sort of historical event. When I say historical event, I mean a mythological historical event. There is no archaeological evidence for the Exodus. I'm sorry, there isn't. I know what the History Channel has told all of us, but there's no real archaeological evidence for the Exodus. So when I talk about these sort of mythological memories, I'm talking about the kinds of things that we hearken to, like George Washington and the cherry tree is another example of a mythological historical event. This is something that we learned about in grade school. Oh, George Washington the cherry tree. Father, I cannot tell a lie. It didn't happen, but it looms very large in our national imagination as Americans. It sort of informs our sense of who we are and what we are as a people. So when I talk about historical events in this way, that is what I'm referencing when I'm talking about historical events in the calendar. Please don't hate me. I know a lot of people do take the Bible as literally the Word of God. Again, I come from a community that also believes in that, so I'm not saying this to sort of mock anyone's belief, because it is mine also. But I also do want to draw a distinction between what we believe as religious people, as part of a religious community, and what we look at from historical points of view, especially when we're citing sources for papers or trying to bring down sort of more historical documents for SCA research. So I do want to make a clear separation between that, but I do not mean to sort of imply that anyone's faith is wrong. That is not at all what I'm getting at. So I hope no one's coming after me or is mad at me. Anyway, historically, a lot of Jewish holidays are based on, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's still true for at least a number of them. This is the Passover Seder plate, and all these foods have some sort of ritual use. The bone, the egg, the maror, the charoset, these are all recalling different aspects of slavery and the Exodus story. So if you look at Passover services, there's something called a Haggadah, and it will go through all of these different items and their historical symbolism and what we're meant to think about when we're talking about an exodus and coming out as a people from slavery into freedom. So Passover is very much, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat, but it's also a story about becoming your own people. And that's a very, very different story. Every nation has this story in some way. America has this story. Everybody has some sort of story about how they as a people came to be, whether that's as a national story or as a religious group. There's always some sort of founding mythology, and Passover is very much part of that. The Passover Seder is held on the first night. In the diaspora, it's held twice. In Israel, it's only held once. Why? Do you guys remember the gift that I showed you earlier about lighting the beacons? The beacons of Gondor are lit and how that kind of took a whole day? Well, when your calendar is a whole day delayed, you're going to keep an extra day just to make sure that you get it right. And that sort of diasporic coping mechanism was kept, even though now we use math and know when the dates are. So in Israel, they never really had that problem. They were kind of the center of the whole calendar thing, so they get to have only one day. Passover begins on the 15th of Nissan, but the sacrifice was given on the afternoon on the 14th, which is mentioned in the earlier Hebrew that I rattled off on the 14th in the afternoon. Because Nissan is the first month, the intercalary month was done on Adar the month before. I know I mentioned all this, it's just a lot of math. Of course, Passover, you have matzah. You don't have regular bread, you have unleavened bread. Some scholars will speculate that this is related to an earlier Canaanite agricultural rite, somehow related to barley, and that this was ultimately the origin of a barley waving ceremony that was performed at the temple during this festival, but we don't really have proof. this isn't something that was preserved in archaeology done on Canaanite settlements. We don't really know. What we do know is that there was a lot of cultural back and forth between the Canaanites and what eventually evolved to become the Israelite kingdoms in the Iron Age. So we know that there was some sort of cultural back and forth, but I don't have some sort of Canaanite calendar to compare to the Hebrew calendar. So unfortunately, it really just does remain scholarly speculation. It commemorates the redemption of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, the beginnings of 40 years of wandering in the desert, and, like I said, the origins of the Israelites as an independent national polity. This is a pilgrimage festival, but not everyone's able to drop what they're doing and take a walk to the center of Jerusalem. That's just not how that works. So there is something called Pesach Sheni, which literally just means second Passover. If you miss doing any of this stuff in Nissan, you could do it again in Iyar. This is still written down in the Talmud, but because we don't have a temple anymore, pretty much nobody knows about Pesach Sheni today. It's not really well discussed. It doesn't have any sort of commemoration in these days. Basically, after the year 70, when the temple was destroyed, Pesach Sheni fell into obscurity because it didn't have any relevance anymore. The counting of the Omer, which again relates to the ripening of the barley, begins on the second night. You count 49 days. The 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot. If you are in the Christian calendar, you probably know about the holiday of Pentecost. It's related to that. Shavuot is a Hebrew word for weeks. It literally just means weeks. You count 7 weeks, and this is the 7 weeks it takes for the wheat harvest and for the barley harvest. It is historically a commemoration of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So you're kind of continuing the theme of what it took to become an independent nation with its own laws and its own customs. Because this is a harvest festival, the themes of green and growing things and flowers are very, very prevalent in the imagery of the day. It is very common for men to bring home to their wives like a whole bunch of flowers. It's very, very normal to see in Orthodox communities, especially, like men coming home with like a whole bunch of flowers for the table. Like that's nice at any time. I hope people you like bring you flowers if you like flowers, but it's sort of almost mandatory of a custom for this holiday in particular. In the book of Numbers, the festival is referred to Chag HaBikurim, which is a festival of the gathering of first fruits, because this was the beginning of the fruit harvest, the earliest of which was dedicated to the temple. Ashkenazi Jews, so Jews of the European diaspora, have a custom to eat dairy. This is given numerous explanations, like, oh, this day is holy, so we don't kill animals, so we eat dairy. But that's a folk backsplanation. It's not real. It was probably learned from local Christian customs and just taken on board and then just justified post facto. But it is a custom that is still observed. Cheesecake is very common in Ashkenazi households and has been for centuries during this holiday. I mentioned Pentecost. It's not actually the holiday of Pentecost. Shavuot and Pentecost are two very, very different holidays. However, the events that led to that holiday occurred during the festival of Shavuot. So that is the linkage. And that is why the English translation will often be called Pentecost, but there is a distinction between the two holidays. Sukkot is my personal favorite holiday. A friend of mine calls it Jewish Penzik, because all of a sudden her neighbors start putting up little huts in the backyard and then they live in it for a week. Not as watertight as the tents you'll find at Penzik. In fact, deliberately not so. But yes, you build a hut and you live in it for a week. Sukkot literally means tabernacles, which is a fancy word for huts. The greenery on top is actually meant to be open to the sky. It's not supposed to be waterproof. You're supposed to be able to glimpse the stars through it. And it is the height of the autumn festival. It is called Zeman Simchatenu, a time of our happiness. It's the best holiday ever. I really, really love it, you guys. I love Sukkot. It happens on the 15th of Tishrei, so right after the New Year and the Day of Atonement. So you've starved for a whole day. You prayed in synagogue. You have your New Year's resolutions. You're gonna start your New Year off on the right foot, and you go right into camping. It's the best. And as the end of the agricultural year, of course, this is when you're bringing in the harvest. So it's a time of great bounty and therefore a time of great joy, known as Chag HaAsif, a festival of gathering, because you're gathering in your crops. I wrote here, wave around the veggie spears, which I'm sure was a note that meant to be clarified. If you are living near a Jewish community around this time, you will see folks going to and from synagogue with a bunch of greenery in their arms, including a palm branch that is waved around. And yes, I was a little bit blasphemous by calling it a veggie spear. It has a lot of symbolism in terms of like Torah study, but it's ultimately really super pagan. It's definitely got some sort of sympathetic magic going on in that it is related to the time of the rains, and you wave greenery around and then you strike it on the ground at the end of the festival as a sort of way to induce God to bringing the rains. And listen, I know Canaanite pagan stuff when I see it. That is definitely some pagan stuff, you guys. That was preserved in the Hebrew calendar long after the Canaanites were assimilated into the monotheistic Israelite religion. In terms of the historical thing that we're commemorating, this is the time of wandering in the desert. You living in temporary dwellings that you have to pick up, take down, move around, set up again very quickly. So confidence in relying on God, even when the weather is starting to turn rainy, is considered the reason that we celebrate in autumn and not the springtime. This is a discussion in the Talmud, but the real reason why we have this holiday now is because this is an agricultural harvest holiday. Hoshana Rabbah and Simchat Torah are kind of an extra holiday tacked on to the end of Sukkot. And this is where you go back inside your regular house. You're no longer living in the hut, but this is when you take the willow leaves out of your lulav and you beat them on the ground to symbolize the rains coming. Simchat Torah is actually a little bit of a newer holiday that was added to this whole festival week. Historically, there was something called Hakel. It was a 3-year cycle in which the Torah was read, and there would be a great gathering at the temple, and it was a whole big deal. We no longer keep that 3-year cycle, not really. Now we have a 1-year cycle. Every year we read the Torah, and on Simchat Torah we finish it, have a big old party, and then start all over again. Simchat Torah literally is just about happiness with the Torah. Rejoice in the Torah. Hoshana Rabbah is considered the last of the days of judgment. On Rosh Hashanah, your fate is written. On Yom Kippur, your fate is sealed. On Hoshana Rabbah, it's filed in the organization system. But by the time you get there, you're supposed to be having a great time. You're supposed to be pretty confident about starting the new year off right. I work here Hakel every 7 years. I misremembered. Sorry, guys. There's lots of sevens in the Hebrew religion, in that you have a lot of cycles of 7. Every 7 years you would have Shemitah, which was an agricultural rest year. So you don't really farm that year. You give the land a break. Debts would be cleared every 7 Shemitah, so a cycle of 7 times 7 on the 50th year. So after the 49th year, the 50th year, all your debts are cleared. Land reverts to its original owners. Every 7 years, you would have people gather at the temple, and the king would read sections of the Torah. We don't have a king. We haven't had a king in a very long time, and we will probably never have a king again. But since there is a now modern state of Israel, some folks decided in the 1950s that they're going to revive part of the sort of reading at the Kotel, what remains of the temple complex, and that's cute, but it's not really part of the calendar anymore. But in the Iron Age, it certainly was. By the times of the classical era, that came to an end. This is the lulav and etrog. When I said waving the veggie spear around, this is the veggie spear that I'm talking about. It's a young palm branch that has not yet unfurled, and it's the spine of the whole complex. You have a myrtle branch, you have the willow, and you have an etrog, which is a citron. In Leviticus, it talks about taking a lovely fruit from a lovely tree, and I guess they really liked citrons, and that was decided to be the lovely fruit, Pri Eitz Hadar. Interestingly enough, the citron originates in China, so this is very much an ancient Silk Road sort of import. It is related to the lemon. It's pretty tasty. You can make some nice liquor out of it. There's a sort of Kabbalistic ideal that the lulav and etrog are meant to represent different kinds of Jews, or they represent different parts of the body. The citron is the etrog is your heart, because that is, the seat of your soul. It's the loveliest part. The straight-backed palm branch is the spine, and the willow is your lips, and the myrtle is your eyes. Don't worry about it. That's something I also learned as a kid, but you don't have to believe in that. It's cute little symbolism. You shake it at the sky, you demand rain, then you smack the leaves on the ground and ask for rain, and it's all very, very pagan. So those are the major holidays. The minor holidays, Purim is held on the 14th of Adar, and that commemorates when in Persia someone tried to kill all of us, and the queen was like, actually, I'm Jewish too. Can we like not do that? So they tried to kill us. They tried to kill us. They failed. Let's eat. Big festival. Hanukkah just happened just a little while ago. That is a similar thing. The Syrian Greeks tried to kill us. They failed. We had a war. Let's light some candles and fry some food. Tu B'Shvat is the New Year for the trees. That happens on the 15th of Shvat. Tu B'Av is the 15th of Av. So historically, that was when wood was brought into the temple. It was, restock. It's also when marriages were arranged. So there is a sort of revival of Tu B'Av as a sort of Israeli Valentine's Day. And that's pretty much what it is today, some sort of low-key Valentine's Day where everyone's sending each other chocolates and cute little cards with hearts on them and stuff. Lag BaOmer is a bonfire festival. There's a lot of Kabbalistic lore associated with it. It's very hard for me to sort of pin down what that evolved out of. I suspect that it has some very obscure roots that I haven't really been able to pin down to tell you, but nowadays in Israel, in Meron, there's a huge festival. This is something that was marked, even in the diaspora, for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years as some sort of bonfire festival in some way. The Talmud mentions a story about how there was a great plague of Rabbi Akiva's students, and Lag BaOmer was when that plague abated, and so they celebrated with a bonfire. So there's all sorts of stories that are attached to an existing festival, but the origins, I'm sure it's written in some text. I just personally haven't found it yet. Fast days. We've gone through all the feast days. Now we have our fast days. I've gone through the most major fast day, which of course is the Day of Atonement. That's not a sad day. It's a serious day. You're supposed to take it seriously. You're supposed to take yourself seriously. You're supposed to take your goals seriously. You're supposed to take the welfare of your community seriously. But it's not a sad day. You're not mourning anything. Most of these fast days are minor fast days, and that work is permitted. So I'm going to be in the office very hungry and cranky on these days, but it's otherwise, other than not eating, it's considered a fairly normal day. These, in general, commemorate terrible occurrences in our history. Some Gedalia happens right after Rosh Hashanah. It's right after. It's literally the day after. That commemorates the assassination of the governor of Judah. So that is mourning the end of any national independence and self-rule. And that occurred after the destruction of the first temple. So it's a very, very old sort of, we're still talking about this one guy who was assassinated. Asara B'Tevet is a little bit newer, but that also is, I'm mixing it up. Asara B'Tevet is also from a similar time period. That marks the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. If you're looking for a historical text, you would look in Kings 2. That event is described. So that is sort of commemorating the beginning of the end. The beginning of the end. When, soon after that, the walls would be breached, the temple would be set to fire, massive diaspora, the whole kit and caboodle when empires roll into town. Pretty standard fare. Ta'anit Esther is the 13th of Adar. So that happens right before the festival of Purim. It is described in the book of Esther where she goes and fasts for 3 days before she presents herself before Artaxerxes and begs for the life of herself and her people. Unless the 13th is a Shabbat, you do not fast on the Sabbath, with very rare exception. So in that case, it's just moved to Thursday. But usually, if it's landing in the middle of the week or something, you just fast the day before. That's one of the few fasts that isn't particularly sad. We fast to remember her sacrifice, but it all ended up okay, because that was when a genocide was averted. We like that. Shavasar B'Tammuz is in July, and that begins a 3-week period of intense mourning. So over the 3 weeks, the public acts of mourning increase. That ultimately ends with Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. So Shavasar B'Tammuz marks the date of the breach of the walls of Jerusalem by the Romans, many centuries after the Babylonians. So we're talking classical era, well into the time period that you'll see in the SCA already. Tisha B'Av is the 9th of Av, and just by historical quirk, both temples were put to fire more or less on the same day. One started burning on the 8th, one finished burning on the 10th. The 9th of Av, they were both on fire in many, many centuries apart. And this is the most intense day of mourning for the Jewish people. Ended any self-rule, ended independence, but because this was sort of our calendar day of mourning, other historical tragedies are remembered on this day. If you visit a synagogue on this day, you'll find that there are mourning hymns that are sung for the Crusades, the Inquisition, and the Holocaust. So this is sort of a big mourning day. Any national awful things, they're commemorated on this day. And that concludes our slideshow. I am going to stop sharing. And please feel free to hit me with any questions. We have 10 minutes left on the hour. Oh, I'm now looking at the thing on the side. I see I can't hear the names of the month without singing this song in my head. Big same. I did not sing the song, and I want you all to be very, very proud that I did not sing the song that I learned as a child. I mean, I can sing it if you want me to, but it'll mostly be just a bunch of nonsense words for most of you, so I'm not sure how valuable that will be as a learning tool. Yeah, it is a lot. Yay. That is a very good question. Are there any holidays that were specifically celebrated during the Middle Ages that fell out of favor? I haven't found any, but that doesn't mean that they didn't exist, especially because a lot of communities would institute their own local practices. For the most part, I stuck with things that would be used and familiar to Jews throughout 2,000 years of diaspora. And that means a diaspora as far as Central Asia, all the way to the Americas in late period. So that's a very large part of the world, known and unknown. So what individual communities may have done is a little bit beyond me, and I'm afraid I don't have any answer to you. So the answer is, I'm sure there are, but I don't know them. There are customs that were added to these various holidays in the Middle Ages. For those of you familiar with Hanukkah, so lighting the menorah was pretty standard, but playing dreidel, playing that little gambling top, that was actually a Yule custom that was brought in from primarily the Germans, actually, and it was known as teetotum. It was a gambling game played during Yule. It was a totally Christian custom, and we took it from you guys, and that's how dreidel became part of Hanukkah. But interestingly enough, gambling itself using a spinning top, that game, that teetotum game, that Yule game, has its roots with the Romans, and the Romans learned it from the Greeks. So there's a sort of story that in order to evade capture from the Seleucid Greeks during the Civil War that Hanukkah commemorates, the Jews would have like lookouts, and they would be playing this little gambling game, and then they would like alert everybody else who would hide the Torah scrolls so that they wouldn't get caught. And they said, and they were playing dreidel. They probably were not playing dreidel because dreidel was a Yule game, but they might have been playing the ancestor of the dreidel game, learned from the Romans, then taken to Central Europe, eventually becoming the Yule game that the Jews then learned again and ended up bringing into part of Hanukkah. So that is definitely something that happened in the Middle Ages. That's the origin of that one minor holiday custom. Which holiday is the one where you really dance your heart out? All of them, if you're not a coward. Jokes aside, that would be Simchat Torah, when you celebrate finishing all 5 books of Moses, and then you turn it all over and start all over again. So that is when you're, as a child, we no longer do this. We no longer block off the streets. But my little synagogue in New Jersey, we would literally get a permit, block off a side street, and just like the Torah would come out, and everybody would dance with it in the street. And we didn't have instruments because this was an Orthodox congregation. So instruments were considered a no-no during major holidays, and we'd just be singing and dancing around in circles on the top of our lungs. But that being said, there's no party like a Purim party. Nobody gets down like the Jews on Purim. There's another custom that was learned in the Middle Ages. You will often find people refer to Purim as Jewish Halloween. in that a lot of Jews dress up in costumes during this time, especially if they're children. I did too. I loved Purim as a child for that reason. That is not really a Jewish custom. If you ask people today, they'll be like, "Oh, God isn't mentioned in the book of Esther. God hid his face, but it was still miraculous. Like God hid his face, but still did miracles for our people. We will hide our face behind masks and dress up." It's very, very cute, but that's not the explanation. It's actually directly related to Carnival. It's a Lent custom. Because this is a Carnival celebrated in February, so Purim was celebrated very soon after in early March, more or less, depending on how the calendar works. Again, lunar, solar calendars, things move around a little bit. But everybody else was dressing up, and the Jews wanted to dress up, and it was close enough in time, so they all started dressing up. It's literally learned from the Italian Carnival. So that was very much something that was picked up in the Middle Ages during this time period. As that festival evolved, it influenced our celebration of our festival that was nearest to it in the calendar. But dressing up's still a good time. I'm curious about the material culture of the calendar, methods of physically tracking the cycles, and date math. Oh my gosh. The math makes my head spin. There are a couple of different ways to understand the Metonic cycles, and ultimately the way that we settled on is not the best. It's going to take another couple of thousand years, but by the time it's 10,000 years from now, the Hebrew calendar will be completely out of whack with the solar calendar, so there's going to have to be some sort of updating system, but we're fine for at least the next couple of centuries, so no one's going to do anything about it. Like back in the day, it was, you would stick your head outside and check. And moon wars is actually still something that you'll find occurring with the Muslim calendar. And my friends who are religious Muslims will like argue. It's like, no, today was the new moon. No, yesterday was the new moon, because people are going outside, sighting the new moon, and then this news disseminates. And that used to be the way that the Jewish people would do that as well. And only over time did this sort of mathematical nailing down happen. You see the final nailing down of that rules codified with Maimonides' works in the 12th century, but most of the work was done well before Maimonides, well before Maimonides. And it was sort of, multiple layering of making the math work better, and you'll find some of that in the Talmud. But in terms of how do I understand the math, the short answer is I don't. I'm not good at math, you guys. I did look at various Wikipedia breakdowns just to try to understand it. Guys, I leave it to you. Good luck. Godspeed. I hate math. I can't do it. Moon Wars. I know them well. Yes. Rosh Hashanah was always considered a new year and a high holiday, and it is in the Torah, and it uses the word of Shabbat, Shabbaton with Yom Kippur, and Yom Shabbaton with Rosh Hashanah, and it is the only time that you really see that kind of very strong language. So while we have multiple New Years, the civil New Year of the first of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, was always there. So it was always that, and yet in the Torah it also says on the first of the 7th month. How do you have a New Year in the 7th month? So we understand that you had an ecclesiastical New Year for kings and festivals, first of Nissan. That is when you start counting the months, Nissan, Iyar, Sivan. And the first of Tishrei is when the calendar changes over from, 5777 to 5778. That happens on the first of Tishrei. So it's a little bit janky, but it's held together this long, so it'll probably keep going. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. You can feel free to unmute yourselves also and just, holler questions at me. I'm very approachable, I promise. Thank you. I mostly felt like I was speaking like a very strange person, so I'm very glad you enjoyed it. Hey, I'm glad you all had fun. Thank you so much for giving me this wonderful opportunity and letting me talk at you for an hour about the evolution of one tiny, very odd, Near Eastern relic of a calendar. So yeah, I hope you had fun learning about stuff in the ancient Israelite land.